Hey everyone, I'm Jess. Welcome to Glue La La. Now that Christmas is over, I'm going to start switching out my decorations from Christmas to winter. So today I'm bringing you 5 different pieces that I've created that are themed around snowflakes so that we can keep them up all winter long. Alright everyone, let's get started. To get started on our first project, you'll need a pack of these tumbling tower blocks from the Dollar Tree. And I took groupings of 4 blocks and 3 blocks. And you can see here, I glued together 3 sets of 4 blocks and 2 sets of 3 blocks. And then for the base, you'll need 17 blocks and you're going to glue those the whole way across. Now, when I glued these together, I used wood glue, but you could probably get away with using hot glue also. So when I wanted to paint this, I at first thought I was going to do more of a gray wash type stain on these blocks. So I took the Elephant Color by Waverly and I watered it down, and then I started wiping it off with a paper towel like you would a stain. But as I was doing that, I really didn't like how it looked, so then I went back over the blocks with the watered down paint and let that dry because I wanted it to be a little bit more opaque than whenever I wiped it off with the paper towel. And I did that with all of the blocks and the base that I glued together. Once all of my blocks had dried, I realized I still didn't really like the color of it, so I took a little bit of this Truffle Color by Waverly and I decided to kind of dry brush that on over top of it just to make the gray look a little bit more distressed and aged, and then to add a little bit more warmth to it. I think it was the tone of the gray that I just didn't care for, and also it was just really uneven. I think I probably would have liked it better had I not watered it down, but I actually like how the truffle gave it some added dimension. So using my Cricut, I cut out the word snow and I cut out a snowflake, and I just cut this out on white cardstock. And the glue that I'm using here is called Art Glitter Glue, but there's no glitter in it. The reason I like using this glue for smaller projects like this is because it comes with this metal tip, so you just get a very little amount of glue out, especially when you're using finer pieces that you cut out on cardstock. And the glue dries very clear and very matte, so even if you get a little bit oozing out over the sides, you're not going to see it once it's dry. So once I had all of the letters and the snowflake in place, I just used my ruler to help find the center of the base, and I started hot gluing the letters onto the base that we created out of the tumbling tower blocks. Now, if you don't have a Cricut, you could just buy letter stickers from the Dollar Tree or Michael's or any other craft store. Or if you're really good at hand painting, you could also hand paint the letters and the snowflake on yourself. But I don't really have good skills with that, so that's why I chose to use my Cricut. And then just to reinforce it, I added a bead of hot glue on the back just to help keep those blocks in place. And here's a look at the finished project. I think this turned out really neat. I was a little frustrated with the painting at first, but once I added that truffle on there, I really liked the color of it in the end. Okay, so for the second project, this one is going to be really simple. We're just going to create a pillar candle holder here. And I'm using one of these cork sheets from the Dollar Tree. They have an adhesive back on them, and I decided that with the vase that I had picked out that I wanted my cork sheet to be cut down to 4 inches. So I measured out 4 inches on the back and I cut it off. And I know that this is an adhesive sheet, but I wanted to make sure that it stayed in place a little bit better. So I did end up using a little bit of hot glue whenever I placed it on to make sure that it stayed in place on the glass. And I did have to cut a little bit of excess off there because when it wrapped around, it was a little bit too long. Once I had the cork sheet all glued onto the vase, I decided to use some of these snowflake charms from the Dollar Tree, and I just ran some jute through the top of them. And using this lace also from the Dollar Tree, I ran that around the top where the cork and the glass kind of meet. And then I used the jute that I had put on the snowflakes to kind of hang it off of the front of the candle holder, and then I created a small bow out of the same lace and put it over the top. Here's another look at our candle holder. I think this turned out really pretty, and I'm excited to add it to my living room for the winter. And I think it would make a really cute centerpiece too if you were having a winter wedding. For the next project, I took one of these 8x10 photo frames from the Dollar Tree, and I took it apart, and I'm using the same elephant color by Waverly, and I'm actually painting right on the glass, and I ended up giving the glass 2 coats of the chalk paint. The frame itself is like a matte black, and I liked how it looked, so I just left that alone. I also took 2 different sizes of these plastic snowflakes from the Dollar Tree, and I'm using the plaster color by Waverly, and I ended up just giving these 1 coat of the plaster color, and I did paint 2 of the big ones and 2 of the small ones, but we're actually only going to need 3 for this project, but the other big one we're going to use in a project in a little bit. And what's neat about this is these snowflakes had a little bit of glitter on them, so once I painted them, the texture of the glitter came through, so it kind of made it look like real snow. So back to the glass that we painted with the elephant, I'm using that same plaster color, and I'm just using a toothbrush, and I dipped it in the paint, and then I ran my thumb along the bristles to kind of spatter it on there to make it look like snow. And then I used one of these stylus tools from the Dollar Tree just to create little dots that look like a little bit of a bigger snowball as the background for this piece. So once that was all painted, I took the frame and I put it back together, and I made sure that the paint side was facing out, so it looked really cool because we painted right on the glass, so it had a nice matte finish. And then I'm just gonna hot glue these 3 snowflakes into place. And then once there, I'm kind of showing you that the glitter on there kind of made it, give it a little bit of a snow texture on there. And then once I had all 3 of these glued into place, I decided to create a little bit of an embellishment in the corner of the frame. But because this frame is plastic, I did use a little, I used a sanding block to kind of sand the frame itself just a little bit, because I was afraid if it didn't have a little bit of a rougher texture that the hot glue wouldn't adhere to it very well. So I'm just using a few of these frosted pine picks and some frosted pine cones, and I kind of hot glued those into the corner, and then I created a little bow using some black and white ribbon, and I glued that on top as well. If you've seen some of my previous videos, you've probably seen that I have a small gallery wall in my living room, so I'm really excited as I switch out my Christmas decorations. I'm going to add this to my gallery wall for winter. So for the next project, I'm using one of these 9.5-inch wreath forms from the Dollar Tree and one of these microfiber car wash cloths. I decided to cut this cloth into 1.5 wide strips, and I'll be using that in place of ribbon to wrap around the wreath. Normally when you're wrapping a wreath form with ribbon, you don't have to really worry about where the ribbon starts and stops because it's one continuous length. But because this is strips, you want to make sure that every time you wrap a new strip around, when you get to the end, you want to make sure that it's always on the back so you don't see those raw edges from the front. So once I had the wreath form covered with the car wash strips, I took some jute twine and I glued that in place, and I wound it around the wreath going in one direction, and then when I got back to where I started, I turned directions and I crossed it back over on itself so that when you looked at it from the front, it looked like the jute formed an X pattern across the front of the wreath. Once I had wound the jute around the wreath going in both directions, I didn't cut it off so that I could zigzag it down the front of the wreath, and I was able to do that 4 times. There were 4 snowflakes left in that pack that we used earlier. I decided to string some jute through each one of them, and then I glued a pine cone onto the front of it, and I tied it onto each of the lengths of jute that we had zigzagged through the front of the wreath to kind of make it look like it was hanging from each of the lengths. I think this would be really cute too. If you didn't have these little snowflake ornaments, you could also just cut out some snowflakes out of cardstock, and you could even use little mini clothespins to hang them from the jute on the wreath. And a few of these I did add just a little bit of hot glue just to help keep it in place on the string. And once I was done, I was trying to decide if I wanted to add a bow or not to the wreath, but I actually just decided that I liked it simple, so I chose not to add a bow. But you could do that, and you could even create a bow out of that same car wash cloth. I've been seeing a lot of snowflakes made out of clothespins all over Pinterest and Instagram, so I decided to try and make one because I had never made one before. And these clothespins are actually from Walmart, but you can get wooden clothespins from the Dollar Tree, but I think the ones from Walmart are actually a little bit of a better deal. And all you do is you just have to twist it a little bit to get the spring to kind of pop loose on the clothespin, and then you just glue the 2 backs together. And for the snowflake that I'm making, I needed 6 sets of these, so I had to use 6 clothespins all together. And then I took some white chalk paint and I just did a real light coat over the clothespins themselves. I kind of wanted a little bit of the wood to show through, so I didn't do a real heavy coat of the paint. And then using one of these 8x10 canvases from the Dollar Tree, I just used my utility knife to cut the canvas from the frame. And we're going to be adding a backer to this, so you don't have to worry about pulling the clothespin or the staples out of the back of the frame. And then I used my sanding block because there were a few little splintery pieces on this frame, so I just sanded them down. And then using that same white chalk paint, I did the same thing with the frame. I gave it a light coat, and I wasn't too worried about getting a full coverage because I didn't mind if a little bit of the wood grain showed through. So using another one of these cork sheets from the Dollar Tree, the width of this sheet was the perfect fit for this frame, so I just had to cut a little bit of excess off for the length, and then I just hot glued it onto the back of the frame. So the large snowflake that we had painted earlier, I decided to glue that into the center, and then it had 6 longer pieces on it, so that's why I decided to make 6 of those clothespin bundles, and I just hot glued those right on top of that snowflake. And I kind of went back and forth as to whether I should put a bow on this or not too, but in the end I decided not to. Here's a final look at all of the projects I created today. You'll have to let me know in the comments which one is your favorite. I think my favorite was probably the Clothespin Snowflake. I really like how those cork sheets worked in these craft projects. Thanks everyone. If you like this video, make sure you hit the like button and make sure you're subscribed. And if you're not already, follow me on Instagram at GlueLaLa, and I'll talk to you in the next one. Bye!